It's like the school lunch table. Trade you for your pudding cup. Sorry, I'm waiting for this to load.
Marcia, you're right.
All right,
I had
it is
my brain
loaded.
mixed up. I wasn't thinking of my grandkids.
Kids can think of you. And would that not be touching if, after all you've done for your children and grandchildren, if they would reciprocate in some small way, host an onik for your bar mitzvahs?
I wouldn't want a small way, I'd want a
Go
big.
big, go big. Let's do that.
I wanna go all in if
You've invested a lot in them, they can invest in you.
you know.
Well,
See if I can get Arrowhead Stadium.
that would be fun. All right, so
The rec center would be good enough.
Actually, the guy who used to, he still does do it sometimes, a scoreboard. He's a Jewish psychiatrist who trained in many groups. He moved to Atlanta, he was back for the reunion, Rich Weiner. Did the chief scoreboard.
well, let's go ahead and get started, and we'll start with our blessing for the study of Torah, even though it's Talmud. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen v'amen. And we're going to start, we're in Barachot, we're on a new page, 12a, and we're talking about something we talked about a little earlier. So earlier, the Gemara talked about the priests in the temple and that they read the Ten Commandments, right? This is when they were doing their part of the thing, they read the Ten Commandments along with sections of Shema, V'haya im Shmoa, Vayomer, and then it says true and firm, it's Emet V'yatziv, and the Amidah or the Avodah, the prayer, the worship, and the priestly benediction, Birkat Kohanim. So these are the things that they did. And Rabbi Yehuda said that Shmuel said, even in the outlying areas outside the temple, they sought to recite the Ten Commandments in this manner every day, as they are the basis of the Torah, which is what Rambam says. But they had already abolished recitation of the Ten Commandments due to the grievance of the heretics, who argued that the entire Torah, with the exception of the Ten Commandments, did not emanate from God. This is from the Jerusalem Talmud. If the Ten Commandments were recited daily, that would lend credence to their claim. So their recitation was expunged from the daily prayers. So what was the problem? There were all these heretics, right? And what is the word they use here? They're not going to use, that they're going to use for heretics. Meaning. So a mean is a heretic. Meaning in this case, it's minim, we would say in Hebrew, but minin in Aramaic, is the plural, so heretics. You'll see other words for heretic in the Talmud. This is one of them. A mean, which kind of heretic are you? Will you tell me if I do this?
And were the heretics the Pharisees?
Amin is a Jewish infidel, mostly applied to Jew Christians. Yeah, so Jewish idolaters. But they would say the same thing about us today. They would say we're heretics. Yeah.
I may be confusing two different things. I'm thinking that the high priests were Sadducees, and they believed strictly in the written Torah, that there was no oral Torah. That was Pharisees. So were the Pharisees seen as the Menim, as the heretics? No.
Pharisees were the rabbis. The rabbis aren't meaning, they obviously aren't. They wrote the book. The priests aren't either. They're not Sadducees or Pharisees. These are other people. They could be talking about Essenes. They could be talking about who are the Dead Sea people. They could be talking about any mostly Karaites who don't have a whole thing. In this case, they're saying there was a group of heretics who argued that only the Ten Commandments were God's words, and that the rest of the Torah was man-made. And so they don't want to, they took saying the Ten Commandments out of the daily prayers because they didn't want to give credence to a lot of the decisions the rabbis make about Judaism are based on appearances. And so they didn't want it to look like they agreed with those heretics by venerating the Ten Commandments, by putting them in the daily prayers. So they took them out so that you wouldn't agree with those people. That was also taught in a Baraita that Rabbi Natan says in the outlying areas. So again, this is not in Jerusalem, but we're getting further away. They sought to recite the Ten Commandments in this manner, but they had already abolished their recitation due to the grievance of the heretics. So Rabbi Natan's taught the same thing. We have a Baraita that says the same thing as this other teaching. So we're just recording that this guy also taught it. Maybe he got it. They might have come from the same place and come back together here, but in any event. The Gemara relates that several sages sought to reinstitute recitation of the Ten Commandments, as Rabbah bar Hana thought to institute this in the city of Sura. Sura is a big, important city where? Yes, Persia. Sura is a big, important city in Persia. But Rav Chisda said to him, they already abolished them due to the grievance of the heretics. Right? So he already said, Tarumet Haminim. That's the term, Tarumet Haminim. The grievance of the heretic, we already did this, right? Is grievance a good word? Maybe not. Let's see, what word should we use? Murmur, complaint, or quarrel. Okay, so the argument with the heretics. So too, a Maimar thought to institute this in the city of Nehardea, which is not that far away. Rav Ashi, the most prominent of the sages in that generation, said to him, they already abolished them due to the grievance of the heretics. What are we seeing here? We're about to, by the way, go on to something totally different. So this is the end of this sugya. So what did we learn here? What happened?
One of the most.
The priests in the temple read the Ten Commandments, along with all these other things we do. Then what happened?
Stopped reading the Ten Commandments.
Why?
Because the heretics said the only thing from God was the Ten Commandments, and when they did that, that meant the rest of it.
Okay, so in Jerusalem, the rabbis decided we won't say them anymore with the daily prayers. What happened then?
Expanded all around.
Diaspora happened in a way.
Mhm.
As the Jews were spreading out and lived in areas further than just Judea, we had to deal with some of the problems we still deal with today. How does a Jewish community remain one Jewish community when we don't live in the same place? What happened was all these rabbis, even in the outlying areas, they sought to do it. So you get Rabbi Natan saying he encountered people and he had to stop them from doing it because they didn't know, or they just thought they were inventing it because it wasn't the custom to do it. And Rabbi Bar Chana thought to do it, but Rav Hasta stopped him. And a Maimar tried to do it, but Rav Ashi stopped him. What we see is the rabbinic shaping of minhag, of Jewish practice, right? Nowhere here do they say halacha says you have to or can't say the Ten Commandments. They recognize the whole time it's in our choice whether we want to throw them into our prayers or not. And we might want to, because as Rambam says, they're the foundation of Judaism. But we don't do that. The rabbis decided we don't do that. That means we don't do that in the rabbinic system. And it's up to every rabbi to keep that going. Because when somebody thinks they're going to start doing it, somebody's got to smack them down. Right? Somebody's got to say, this is not how we do things.
Have not the heretics won? Have we not cut off our nose to spite our face?
I do. You say things to me on the internet like you have the heretics won. I don't know. I mean, in a way, I would say in a way yes, and in a way no. I would say in a way no, because rabbis always intended Judaism to change over time. And I'm not sure Rav Ashi telling a Maimar not to do this in Nehardea 2,000 years ago means he wouldn't think things could be different in 2025 if Rav Ashi were capable of considering 2025. I'm not capable of considering 4025, so I don't know how he'd be capable of considering it, but what the hell? Maybe he is. And I think if he was, which he isn't, that he would understand that it's changed, that our understanding of many things has changed. But the Orthodox obviously don't agree with me, which is why it's also partially not. The heretics partially have won. Because the Orthodox would say that Rav Ashi would hit me on the knuckles for saying that, and would say that, of course, nothing has changed. And me insisting there should be change is trying to change things, and therefore I'm a apikoros and a mean and all kinds of terrible things. I'm not a mean because I'm not an idolater, but
It seems like it was an effort at full employment for rabbis. Because
because you needed a rabbi in every town to keep, yeah. You're right. In some ways, it certainly ensured full employment for rabbis, because it ensured if your community was going to do things the Jewish way, you had to have a rabbi to tell you whether you were right or not. And the rabbi had to be trained by a rabbi who's trained by a rabbi who knows the right way to do things.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. To be fair, I was trained by a rabbi who was trained by a rabbi who, back far enough, was Orthodox. So we keep our hashgacha very straight, and we understand how our tradition works and where it comes from. But yeah, you need rabbis. You do. You need them. Hey, we got one here. It works. You're welcome. Okay, moving on. Anyone want to say anything else about this first adventure in minhag shaping? Okay, then we're going to move on to other things about the temple. So we learned in a Mishnah in Tractate Tamid, which we haven't read yet, but we will learn that we did learn already. Because remember, the Talmud assumes this is your at least second time through. So you've already read everything once. All the material. So it's like, okay, we learned before in the future in Tractate Tamid that on a Shabbat, a single blessing is added to bless the outgoing priestly watch. There's an extra blessing on Shabbat. This is great. We get to say an extra blessing. What is it? The Gemara asks, what is that single? We don't know. No, we do know. Let's get to it. Let's find out. So what is it? The Gemara is like, we don't know. What is it? All these rabbis are going to have to answer. Now we're going to have to get answers. So Rabbi Chelbo said, as they finished their service, the outgoing priestly watch would say to the incoming priestly watch, Mi shashichen et shmo babayit hazeh hu yashkin Beinechem ahava ve'achva ve'shalom ve'reut. Right? So he says the blessing they said was, may he who caused his name to dwell in this house cause love and brotherhood, peace and camaraderie to dwell among you. It's a nice blessing.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. Okay. So that's that blessing. We know it now. Now you know the blessing that the priestly guards would say to each other when they were exchanging watch on Shabbos. Okay. We learned in the Mishnah where the sages said to recite a long blessing, and we talked before about the difference between a long and a short blessing. One may not shorten it, and vice versa. You all remember, we learned that together in the Mishnah. The Gemara proceeds to address a particular problem arising from conclusions drawn from this Mishnah. So before addressing the primary problem, however, a simpler secondary issue is raised, but I'm going to ask you first, what is the primary issue? What is the particular problem, do you think? You're guessing. That proceeds from this. From where the sages said to recite a long blessing, one may not shorten it, and vice versa.
Is it what we just read? By saying the new blessing, are they doing what they shouldn't be doing? Are they?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
But interesting thought. What's a problem that comes up when they say, if it's long, you can't make it short. If it's short, you can't make it long?
The blessing?
No, because that
We already
when
had
you say that,
blessing.
you're saying now a blessing can either be short or long, but it can't be changed. So now we're saying no, there can't be any variance. So that's not a problem. So, well, what if there's the one we've discussed already about the Amidah before in Barachot, which is what if you were in danger and you were doing long blessings and you needed to make them short? We have that Amidah that's made short. Is that wrong? I don't know. Okay, let's find out. So there's a secondary issue first, and then we'll get to the primary issue. And the secondary issue, obviously in a case where one took a cup of wine in his hand and thought it was beer and began reciting the blessing thinking it was beer, i.e., he intended to recite the appropriate blessing on beer, it just wasn't really beer, which is She'akol Nihye Bidvaro, which is by whose word all things came into being. And upon realizing that it was wine, he concluded the blessing with the blessing over wine, which we know is different. Who creates, Borei Pri Hagafen, who creates fruit of the vine, he fulfilled his obligation. In that case, even had he recited Shehakol Nihye Bidvaro as he originally intended, he would have fulfilled his obligation. As we learned in a Mishnah, if one recited the general blessing, again, Shekol Nihye Bidvaro, over all food items, he fulfilled his obligation after the fact, even if ab initio, another blessing was instituted to recite before eating that food. Therefore, if he reconsidered and concluded the blessing with the ending of the blessing over wine, he fulfilled his obligation. But he did in either event because he said Shekol Nihye Bidvaro. But so this is a secondary problem because we know it's okay to do this. It's okay to end one with the other if you genuinely made a mistake, right? The blessing over wine is a long blessing. The blessing over beer is a short blessing. But if you started with beer and you end with Borei Pri Hagafen because you're like, oh, right, this is wine, not beer, you're good. So that's already one thing. That's a secondary problem, but that Mishnah couldn't have been talking about this because this is a different situation. So what is it talking about? We still don't know. However, in a case where one took a cup of beer in his hand and thought it was wine and began reciting the blessing thinking it was wine, meaning he intended, so, right, he intended to recite Bore Pri Hagafen, and upon realizing it was beer, concluded with Shekol Nihye Bidvaro. What's the halacha then? Right? So ostensibly, they're going to say here this blessing is comprised of two sections. We're going to try and work through this. The first section, during which he was going to say the wine blessing, cannot fulfill his obligation as it is inappropriate. It's an inappropriate blessing to recite over beer. So he can't do that. However, in the second section, he recited the appropriate blessing. The dilemma then is, do we follow the essence of the blessing, the first section, or do we follow the conclusion, the hatimah of the blessing?
Hatima's rule.
What?
Don't Hatima's rule?
I think so, and I think that's where they're going to go with it. I think that's where they're going to end up on this, but because I think that's how it works. That's how it works. So it must be. We must have gotten that from Talmud, but we'll see. So they're gonna Tashma come in here. They're gonna be like, okay, we're gonna resolve this for you. It's very difficult. So this is a similar case. If in the morning prayer, right? In the morning prayer, Shacharit, they're talking about, one began the blessings prior to the recitation of Shema appropriately. So if you began with Yotzer Or, which is the first blessing you say in that service, and concluded with the formula of the evening prayer, Ma'ariv Aravim, does not fulfill his obligation. So if you start by going, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, and you're doing the whole, Yotzer Or Uvorei Choshek Yosei Shalom Yihied Uvrachol, and like you do the whole Yotzer Or, and then you get to the end and you go Baruch atah Adonai Ma'ariv Aravim. You get no credit. So it sounds like Marcia might be right? Because what you did the whole first part right, and you did the second part wrong, and you get no credit. So it seems like the second part is pretty important. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. So he did not fulfill his obligation. However, if one did the opposite and commenced with Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, whatever the Ma'ariv Aravim, I'm not remembering it, but Ma'ariv Aravim, you know it. We do Ma'ariv Aravim, and then you end with Yotzer Or.
Okay.
Yotze, Yatsa, he did it. He fulfilled. Okay, great. Lo Yatsa versus Yatsa. Yatsa, it seems like the Chatzimah. Similarly, if in the evening prayer one commenced the Shema with who brings on evening and concluded with Yotzer Or, no good. If you started with Yotzer Or and ended with Ma'ariv Aravim, you're good. I think we're being pretty clear. The Baraita summarizes that the general principle is Hakol Halech Acher Hachitum. It's a tough to go Hachitum, which means everything follows the Hatima. So that's the general principle. Based on this principle, the question with regard to a blessing recited over food and drink posed above can be resolved. However, the Gemara is going to say, that's true, but that doesn't have any relevance to what we're talking about. They're going to say that this proof is rejected. In one case, in the case of a blessing recited over Yotzer Or, radiant lights, it is different as one. You don't say Yotzer Or in the end of the blessing. I'm sure you all knew that already when we were doing the last part. But because what do you say? You say Baruch atah Adonai Yotzer HaMe'orot, creator of the heavenly lights. That's not the same as Yotzer, right? That's a little different. The blessing doesn't end with Yotzer Or the way it starts with Yotzer Or. the way in Ma'ariv Arvim, we start saying Ma'ariv Arvim and we end Baruch Atah Adonai Ma'ariv Arvim. We don't end Baruch Atah Adonai Yotzer Or, creator of light, at the end. We don't praise the creator of light, we praise the creator of the heavenly lights. That's different, technically. So they're saying, well, they're saying, no. In one who recites Baruch Yotzer HaMe'orot, and similarly in the evening one recites Baruch Ma'ariv Arvim, since these are long blessings that conclude with a second blessing summarizing their content, one could assert that everything follows the conclusion. However, in the case of a short blessing, such as Shakol Nihye Bidvaro or Borei Pri Hagafen, ostensibly, if there is a problem with the first part of the blessing, the entire blessing is nullified. So we're saying these are both long blessings you're taking. So there's a chatima, like the chatima is separate from this whole other block. So in that case, sure, fine, no problem. But in this case, no good. They're not this, it's different. They're short blessings. The distinction between the blessing recited over the radiant lights and the blessings recited over food and drink stems from the assumption that the conclusion, the Fatima, Baruch Yotzer HaMe'orot, is a complete independent blessing. But is it? Even here, it's going to say, however, this is not necessarily so. But like, is it? It doesn't have to be. It could be, but I don't think it is, personally. Because I don't think it stands on its own. You couldn't just say, Baruch atah Adonai Yotzer HaMe'orot. You could. I mean, you could say that. You could say any combination of words. You could say pineapple, shrimp, hair kebab. But those are four words that don't mean anything together, you know? I mean, it's so you could say that, but that's not effective. That's not the formula for a blessing. Anyway, so he's going to say, and Rav is going to agree with me. He's going to say, this works out well according to Rav, who said, any blessing that does not include mention of God's name. So if you say, Baruch atah Yotzer HaMe'orot, any blessing that does not include mention of God's name is not considered a blessing. And since Yotzer HaMe'orot includes God's name, because we say Baruch atah Adonai, Yotzer HaMe'orot, it constitutes a complete independent blessing. However, according to Rabbi Yochanan, who said any blessing that does not include mention of God's sovereignty, i.e. Melech HaOlam, is not considered a blessing, what can be said to distinguish between the conclusion of the blessings over food and drink and the blessings over this? But if you do that, it's saying, hold on. If what makes a blessing is that it says Melech HaOlam, then neither of these do it. The wine blessing does invoke God's name, Baruch atah Adonai, and then it says Borei Pri Hagafen, right? We don't say anything about God's sovereignty. And the same thing in the food blessing. Shakol Nihye Bidvaro, great, nothing about that. Same thing here with Borei Pri Hagafen, nothing about that. The heavenly lights, Baruch atah Adonai. Okay, we said something about God, Yotzer HaMe'orot. Where's the thing about the sovereignty? No sovereignty. So we're still not there yet. The Gemara responds, Ella, rather, Rabbi Yochanan also holds that the blessing over the radiant lights is a complete blessing. This is interesting. Rabbi Yochanan is the one who said, if it doesn't include the statement about sovereignty, Melech HaOlam, it's not a blessing. But he does think it's a blessing. Since Rabbah Bar Ula said, Uvarei Choshech is mentioned during the day, and rolling away the light before the darkness is mentioned at night, in order to mention the attribute of day at night and the attribute of night in the day, the beginning of the blessing in which God's sovereignty is mentioned, day and night, is appropriate to both day and night. And when one recites the blessing with God's name and mentions God's sovereignty at the beginning of the blessing, it refers to both day and night. Therefore, it's a blessing. In other words, sovereignty is mentioned. It's just mentioned at the beginning. It's not mentioned in the Chatima. So that's how he gets around it. The Gemara is going to attempt another try at this. That time it got about 80% up the hill. It didn't feel it got there. We're going to try to run up that hill one more time. And the Gemara attempts to cite an additional proof. So it says Tashma Misifa, right? From the last thing in the Baraita we talked about before, it said Hakol halech acher hachitum, that everything follows the conclusion. Klalu shel davar, the general principle is that everything follows the Hatima. What does the phrase, the general principle is, come to include beyond the detailed example cited in the Baraita? So the general principle is what we're talking, that phrase. Klalu shel davar. Does it not come to include the case that we stated, that both in the case of a long blessing and the case of a short blessing, the conclusion of the blessing is the determining factor? So why does it say, why we got this piece of text, and in it it said, Klalu shel davar hakol holech acher hachitum. In this text, it said, the general principle is everything follows the Chatima, the conclusion. So doesn't it say the general principle is? So that we know it's general. It applies to both. Or does it do it so that we know that always, in any case, the conclusion is the only thing that matters? The Gemara rejects this. If you thought you were getting somewhere, you are foolish and mistaken. No, the principle is cited to include a case of bread and dates. The Gemara clarifies, because that might be confusing. What are the circumstances of the dilemma with regard to the blessings on these food items? If you say that it is a case where one ate bread and thought that he ate dates, because dates are often made into like a loaf in this time, and so is bread. So anyway, and commenced reciting the blessing, thinking it was dates. Then, upon realizing that it was bread, concluded with the blessing that which is recited over bread. Isn't that our dilemma, as this case is identical to the one involving wine and beer? The Gemara answers, no, this general principle is only necessary to teach a special case where one ate dates and thought that he ate bread and commenced reciting the blessing thinking they were bread. Upon realizing they were dates, he concluded the blessing with that which is recited over dates. In that case, he fulfilled his obligation, as even had he concluded the blessing with that which is recited over bread, he would have fulfilled. So this is an exact parallel, right? Because with beer and wine, the blessing with beer works on wine, but the blessing on wine doesn't work on beer because of how general it is. Here, the blessing over bread works on all food, basically. The blessing over dates only works on fruits. It's right. Dates, figs, those kind of things. But
the rule of perpetuities.
That's I don't.
Illegal.
Sure.
With all kinds of traps in it. And it is very difficult to understand and to follow. It can be simplified. As I listen to this, it reminds me of the rule of perpetuity.
Yeah, and this is a very legalistic text, so that makes sense
Yeah.
for you to draw that comparison. Um,
Isn't the goal to have some similarity between all the rabbis, and they're struggling with what is the right thing to do?
they believe that the showing their work, showing their thought process will help you in making determinations, not just about this, but about other things in the
The
future.
process.
Right, the process is more important than the outcome.
You have to work to be Jewish.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
You almost have to go to law school.
Well, there's lots of Jews that become lawyers.
Again, there's no accident in that.
But I've been thinking throughout this whole discussion, that's why I went to medical school. I'm not,
Well, we do like, again, the Talmud is all about contracts and rules and various things. Yeah, and there are parts of it that are very difficult to parse and that are very windy and long, one long windy thread. And that is the way it is.
So I've given up my license to practice, right? I don't know whether I now have to give up my license to be a Jew.
No, I don't think so. Since we don't have licenses for that, there's no licensure committee that will have a problem. I think you're doing a great job. And so we're gonna see here, right? Okay, so we did that, and we got. If he said it over bread, he would fulfill over dates. By the way, I'm gonna tell you this because we're about to get essentially a teka. It's not gonna say teka here, but we're gonna get a teka, a teku. Essentially a situation in which the rabbis say there is no one answer. So for all of this conversation, which you've been waiting to see what the resolution would be, I just want to apologize. So the Gemara answers no. This general principle is only necessary to teach a special case. Reiterating once again, where one ate dates and thought that he ate bread, commenced reciting the blessing thinking it was bread, but realizing that they were dates, said the blessing over dates. In that case, he fulfilled his obligation, even even had he concluded the blessing with that which is recited over bread, he would have fulfilled his obligation. Okay, and then what is the reason that he had concluded with the blessing recited over bread, as he would have fulfilled his obligation to recite a blessing over dates? This is because dates also provide a person's sustenance. While ab initio, one should not recite the blessing for bread over dates. You can, because you can live off it as if it were bread. So after the fact, if one did so, he fulfilled his obligation. It is with regard to this particular situation that the Baraita established the principle, everything follows the Chatima. So that in this situation, you'd still get credit. Ultimately, the dilemma regarding a blessing with an inappropriate opening and an appropriate conclusion is unresolved. The rabbis don't resolve that for us. It's up to us. And then it goes on to say, the Gemara proceeds to discuss the formula for the blessings recited along with Shema. So it's just letting you know, we're not going to answer that question for you. That question, y'all can work out.
If you recite the Shema, you get the sovereignty of God in the second part of the Shema. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto.
Yes, yeah. True. But we're getting to that. So that's certainly a blessing for sure. Excuse me. Thoughts?
not only could I not have gone to law school, I could have gone to rabbinic school. Yeah.
Well, that's a tough.
Well, Hal, what do you think would be more difficult, becoming a lawyer or rabbi?
From what I'm hearing today, I think becoming a rabbi.
Yeah.
Mm.
I am very impressed.
It is.
Your knowledge and
It's
your
Thank you.
education
I appreciate it. It's,
and ability to teach.
Yeah.
thank you. I appreciate that.
And with humor, making something so difficult and
Well, the humor is just hopefully, sometimes it doesn't land, but yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. We will move forward now as we talk about some of the blessings around Shema. These blessings, you might know some of them. I do it sometimes on Friday nights. I'll do Emet V'Yatziv in the Emet V'Emunah. Emet V'Yatziv is in the morning prayer. And so, yeah, we're going to talk about those. So Rabba Bar Chinana Sava said in the name of Rav, one who did not recite Emet V'Yatziv. I'm going to refer to the prayers by their names rather than by, because that's what they are doing in the quote text up here. If you see, it's just translating the words, but it's putting in brackets the name of the prayer because they're not saying true and firm. They're talking about a specific prayer. One who did not recite Emet V'Yatziv at the beginning of the blessing of redemption that follows Shema in the morning prayer. So blessing of redemption, right? Michamocha comes after this. So you start with this, then you go to Michamocha. Same in our prayer book. And Emet V'Emunah in the evening prayer, he did not fulfill his obligation. So you got to say those morning and evening. An allusion to the difference in formulation between morning and evening is, as it is stated, to declare your kindness in the morning and your faith in the nights, from the Psalms. In the morning, one must mention God's loving kindness, because it says to declare your kindness in the morning, while in the evening, one is required to emphasize the aspect of faith. Makes sense. And each of these does it. In the morning, we do Emet V'Yatziv, which is about how much God takes care of us. So kindness. And then in the evening, it's Emet V'Emunah. Here it says true and trustworthy, but what else does Emunah mean? What does it mean if someone's ever said to you, oh, that person, they have Emunah? Yeah, faith. Emunah means faith too. So that's what, it's like where it says true and trustworthy, you wouldn't get that, but you're supposed to get, oh, it has faith in it. Literally, it says Emet V'Emunah, like truth and faith.
Is there any teaching that really distinguishes day from night? And
What do you mean? In what way?
in ways of what you're supposed to do during the day as opposed to night, and why that distinction? Why the separation between day and night?
Day and night is the most obvious thing to separate, and is in fact the first thing that God separates, essentially, light and darkness. So it's the most natural thing for us to, and we are a people who love separation. We love separation. We're really into it. Kadosh, holy, means separation, essentially. So we think separation is the best thing in the world. So when you ask why would we like, or when you, not why would we, but like when you say like, is there a teaching? All of this is teaching about the differences, things we do day versus night. We have a huge dichotomy between day and night because it's one of our biggest dividing lines, and we love to divide things. We're really into it. So yeah, my answer would be, of course, we're Jews. Of course, we divide things. And what would we divide first? Of course, day and night. So yeah, we do have plenty of differences between what we do in day and what we do at night. We have a whole different service based on the services, a bunch of things between Yotzer and Ma'ariv Aravim, Emet V'Emunah and Emet V'Yatziv. Shalom Rav versus Osei Shalom, Yismachu versus Vishamru. These are all things we do based on the time of day.
That it's primary to our religion.
Yeah, yep.
What we do during the day as opposed to the evening.
Yeah, that these things are different. Yep.
And is it the rabbis that chose what we do during, what prayers we say during the day as opposed to the evening? How did that go?
Yes and no. So a lot of it, like they said before, it's worth noting. I'll scroll up because it's in our text here. Where it says, I didn't realize I was going to be going quite so far.
And the follow-up question is, which is more important?
So let me get down back to where we were because I can't find the thing. Ask me your question again.
Which is more important, what we say during the day or what we say in the evening?
They're both important. What's important is to keep them separate. The separateness is the important part. Not what you say. But we decided what you say. Oh, that was your question. How did we decide? The rabbis decided, we read earlier today, in fact, that some of the decisions of what was said in prayers were decided by what the priests used to recite in the temple. Remember that every prayer service is designed to emulate, in some way, the sacrificial system of the temple. So some of these prayers come from things the priests used to recite. Some of them are things the rabbis think fit the theming correctly or perfectly. So if you're gonna, you need to say something about the morning when you wake up, or you got to say Zokef Kefufim, you got to say who straightens the bent when you first stand up in the morning, or that kind of thing. Like those things make sense because they're tied directly to things you do around these time periods. Um, so where they came from is some of it came from the rabbis, some of it came from before the rabbis. And they codified it, right? They had to get it down into one prayer. Every community can't be doing a different set of prayers, so they got it into one. And which is more important? As far as day and night, there's no more important. They're both important. They're just different. The difference is the important part, not that they are different. Their difference doesn't matter. One is not better than the other. What matters is that they're different, that they're separate. So there you go. I think that's an answer to your question. Okay. Any other questions? My brain's really going. You guys are doing good. I'm starting to get that pressure thing that goes on right here, where the brain starts to like try and poke out the front of my skull to try and answer questions for me. Okay. Rabba Bar Hinana Sava, we've heard from him before, but he's going to say, right, we did that. Okay, we did that. So now he's going to say something else. So Rabba Bar Hinana Sava said in the name of Rab something else. He said, one who is praying when he bows at the right times, not just whenever. We're not saying bow whenever you want, but when you bow correctly. He bows when he says, when does he bow? He bows when he prays. He bows at Baruch, blessed, and he stands upright. He stands B'Shem, at the name of God. So if you see me on Friday night, you've seen me do this, right? What are the times we do this? There's a couple, maybe in the Baruch, right? I go Baruch et Adonai Havarach, but then the second part you go Baruch Adonai. You stand up for the second one. You bend at Baruch. You stand up for Adonai. What's a different example of that? When we do what's the one in the Amidah? Avot v'Givorot, in the first blessing of the Amidah, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, and you do, Avinu v'Imotenu, right? Abraham and Isaac and all those guys. In the end, what do you do? Because at the beginning you go Baruch atah Adonai, right? But you go Baruch atah Adonai. Atah, you're still down. When do you straighten back up? When do you use Okef? Hashem, on the name. So you go Baruch atah Adonai. Pop up. Face your God. Anyway, stand before God as a man. So straighten yourself, or woman. Straighten yourself up before God. And so that's Rabba Bar Hinana Sava has taught you how to bend during prayer. And he's right about that, actually. That is the correct. He's right about that. I don't know what's coming next, but I know he's right about that. Thoughts?
The thinking is curious to me.
You're gonna explain it, but yeah.
Okay, I understand that that's what we do. I never heard the thought, stand up like a man before your God. Could one not also say, humble himself before your God?
You did, you already bowed.
Boy,
And you said God was blessed. That's pretty humble.
okay,
Blessed are you. You bowed before God. And when you say God's name, say it like a man. Stand up and say it. Sorry, that's how I was taught to pray, but I was also raised in the 90s and you could say stuff like that to kids. I don't teach our kids that way. I say, and we stand up to greet God, I think is what I say when I teach the kids how to move during prayer. But when I was a kid, it was stand up like a man. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
I was never taught any of this.
Oh, I teach our kids how to move during prayer because they should know it when they get out of here. Yeah, no, there's specific movements. If you see me during prayer services, you'll see me doing the movements of prayer.
That's how I learned.
Oh, okay,
Not because
interesting.
anybody taught me.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, some people do learn just by like osmosis because they go to services and then they see it and they emulate it. You can learn that way. People learn Hebrew that way in our communities often enough. They what's it called? We call it not transcoding.
Emulate.
No, there's a word for when you see letters and you
Transliterating?
no. You do it in your head. There's a word for it. Don't worry about it. It's not oh, if it ever comes back to me, I'll use it. Okay. Anyway, so now you know how you bow during prayer. Also, just as a heads up, because this is my biggest pet peeve, you only do the bowing and the Amidah on that first for the Avot V'Imahot. At the end, so at the beginning and at the end of that prayer, you do it. You don't do it in Gevurot. You don't do it at Atakadosh. You don't do at Kedusha. You don't do it for you do it for Modim Anach Lach for the Hora blessing, but you don't do it for the other two of the that we do out loud. So no bowing in those parts. Please, nobody bow.
And the reason for that
There's just no bowing in those parts.
okay, so
The reason for that is ain't no bowing in those parts. You understand?
by the rabbi,
It's minhag, right? Right.
why they don't have 10 pages.
We just don't bow then. We bow in the first one, we don't bow in the second and third. I wish I could give you a better reason for why, but we just don't do it.
After you finish your piano presentation, you get up, you can bow.
Yeah, sure.
I play the clarinet, that'd be a little academic at that point.
Shmuel, we're going to hear a little bit about this now. Shmuel, who was Rav's colleague and significantly outlived Rav, that's important because Rabba Bar Hinana Sava taught this in the name of Rav. But Shmuel, who's responding and was Rav's colleague, might be responding to this guy actually. This might not be a generational conversation. This might be, they could actually talk to each other because that's why they let us know that Shmuel worked with Rav, but also lived like 30 years longer than him. So this guy might be teaching while Shmuel is still alive when he says this. So Shmuel said, what is Rav's reason for saying that one should stand upright at the mention of God's name? Diktiv, Hashem Zokev Kifufim. I was telling you, Zokev Kifufim is one of our Birchot HaShachar, one of the Nisim B'chol Yom, the prayers for daily miracles that we say when we wake up every morning, and we say Baruch Atah Adonai Zokev Kifufim, who straightens the bent or raises the bowed. And so Shmuel is teaching Rav's reasoning. So somebody did what you guys did to me. Lorne said to the Lorne of 2,000 years ago, said to Rabba Bar Chinana Sava, why? And he said, that's what we do. He said, and Rabba Bar Chinana Sava said back to him, man, this is the teaching I got. I just know to tell you we didn't do it. I don't know why he thought that. And Shmuel, who knew him, says, I know why I thought that. He says, it's because the prayer from the Birkat HaShachar, which comes from Psalm, says, God raises the bowed. And if God raises the bowed, one stands upright at the mentions of God's name to recall that it's God who makes us stand upright. And so we should stand upright for God. And here we're going to get this thing. Here's Lauren's exact. I didn't want to give him credit ahead of time, but here's his exact complaint. The Gemara raises an objection based on what we learned in praise of a priest that said, Mipnei Shmi Nichatu, that he was afraid before my name, indicating that one must be humbled and not upright before God's name. In other words, if you were really humble, why wouldn't you stay bowed for God's name? The Gemara responds, is it written at my name? Does it say Bishmi in Mipnei Shmi Nichatu? No, it says Mipnei Shmi. It says before my name is written, meaning that one is humbled and bows prior to the mention of God's name, and then when he says Baruch, right? Same way, you go to a king, you say my king, right? You go like this, and so that's what they're saying here. You say Baruch Atah Adonai. You're still bowing. You're still being respectful. They're like, what are you talking about? It's not lack of humility.
So getting back to,
And just to end this, it just says, sorry, we'll end this page and then we'll be done. The Gemara relates, Shmuel said to Hiya bar Rav, son of Torah, come and I will tell you a great saying that your father said. Your father said the following, when one bows, he bows when he says Baruch. And when he stands upright when he says Bashem. He says it he raises up on the name. So Shmuel then went up to this guy who was the son of Rav. Again, this is all happening, and Shmuel worked with Rav. Rav's long dead. Chia is Rav's son. And so Shmuel, after teaching this, and they say, but Shmuel, isn't it rude to bow for God's name? He says, you bowed before God's name, you're good. And Shmuel goes over to Rav's son and he says, he calls him he calls him Bar or Ayan. Does anyone know what we call a law in Aramaic from the Torah? A law from the rabbis is called derabbanan, or of the rabbis. Of the Torah is called deoraita. Does that sound similar to something here? Orayon is the same concept. So it means Torah, but it means more like the light of God's whatever. It's not the specific word, but it's the Aramaic. It means Torah. So he says, son of Torah. This is a great honorific, saying that his dad Rav was like the Torah. Come and I will tell you a great saying that your father said. And he teaches it now. Now, again, they already heard it. The guy just said it. But like he said, I'll teach it to you and you can believe it. So that's the answer there.
so here's